At least we're balanced.
Good evening and welcome to the February 19th meeting of Troy City Council. I am Marty Baker, President of Council. Please silence your electronic devices for the duration of the meeting. We'll begin with the invocation followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. Let us pray. Let us pray for wisdom to make decisions that are in the best interest of our city. We pray for the first responders locally and throughout our country. Bless the military serving in the U.S. and abroad. Bless our community and our world with peace. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Phillips?
Here.
Mr. Swayzer?
Here.
Mr. Heath?
Here.
Mr. Sievert?
Present.
Mr. Twist?
Here.
Mr. Kendall?
Here.
Mr. Lutz?
Here.
Mrs. Oda?
Here.
Mr. Twilliger?
Make a motion to excuse Mr. Terwilliger.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Kendall to excuse Mr. Terwilliger. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Swayzer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Here. Yes.
Mr.
Yes, I'm
Twilliger
here. And
is
yes, I'm
excused.
voting. Both of you? Yes. Me,
Thank
myself, no.
Tonight we have a public hearing. Mrs. Knight, please read ordinance 03-2019.
Ordinance number 03-2019, the ordinance changing the zoning of in-lot 10622 in the city of Troy from M2 Light Industrial District to an industrial plan development. This is located at 44 Peters Avenue, has been recommended by the Troy Planning Commission.
I declare the public hearing open. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak in favor of the ordinance? Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak against the ordinance? I declare the public hearing closed. Mrs. Knight, please read a summary of the minutes of the February 4th, 2019 meeting of Troy City Council.
Minutes of Council, February 4th, 2019. Committee reports. Finance Committee recommended that legislation be prepared authorizing the purchase and bidding of an articulated compact loader for the Cemetery Department. Personnel Committee reported regarding the appointment of Mr. Richard Bender to the ED Revolving Loan Fund Review Committee, and that appointment was approved. Recreation and Parks Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing bidding and contracting for the Troy Recreation Trail Resurfacing Project. Resolution number R2-2019, bid for the compact loader for the Cemetery Department was given first reading and adopted. Resolution number R3-2019, bid and contract for the Troy Recreation Trail Resurfacing Project was given first reading and was adopted. Ordinance number 03-2019, rezoning of in-lot 10622 was given first reading. There was a presentation by Mr. Swayzer regarding the activities of the Activate Troy Partnership. Following various comments, council adjourned at 7:17 p.m.
Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes as read.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Heath and seconded by Mr. Swayzer to approve the minutes. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer?
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
We'll move on then to the committee reports this evening, and we'll begin with the Finance Committee and Chairman Mr. Tom Kendall.
Thank you, Madam President. I do have two reports tonight. The first, the subject matter is proposed adjustments of the cemetery fees.
This committee met on February 11th to consider adjustments to the fee schedule related to cemetery fees, which were last adjusted in 2014. It is a recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared, amending the fee schedule to adjust the cemetery fees as recommended by the cemetery foreman. We further recommend that the new fees be effective April 1st, 2019. And this is respectfully submitted by Mr. Swayzer, Mr. Sievert, and myself as chair.
Are there any questions from council? You may continue, Mr. Kendall.
Okay. Next subject is a small business development loan. It's for Slimline Surgical Devices, doing business as Canyon Run Engineering Technologies. On February 11th, this committee met to consider the recommendation of the Loan Review Committee to approve a new application of Slimline Surgical Devices, doing business as Canyon Run Engineering Technologies. The details regarding the loan are discussed in the detailed report. This committee recommends or supports the recommendation of the Loan Review Committee of approving this application as meeting the intent of the Small Business Development Revolving Loan Program, and recommends that legislation be prepared approving the loan application of Slimline Surgical Devices, doing business as Canyon Run Engineering Technologies, in the amount of $83,737.50 from the Small Business Development Revolving Loan Fund. Committee further supports emergency legislation so that the loan can be processed without delay, so that the business can order the new equipment. And this is also respectfully submitted by Mr. Swayzer, Mr. Sievert, and myself as chair of the Finance Committee.
Are there any questions or comments from council? Thank you, Mr. Kendall.
Thank you.
Personnel Chairman, Mr. Todd Sievert, has our next reports.
Thank you, Madam President. The first report I have concerns the council appointment to the CRA Housing Council. It is recommended and that council make 2 appointments to the Community Reinvestment Area Housing Council. Council appointees have been Mark Douglas and Larry Smith. Their terms expire December 31st, 2018, and both are willing to accept new 3-year appointments. I would move that council approve the reappointment of Mark Douglas, Larry and Smith to the CRA Housing Council for terms commencing immediately through December 31st, 2021. And I have spoken with all members of the committee who concur with that recommendation.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Sievert and seconded by Mr. Kendall to appoint Mark Douglas and Larry Smith to the CRA Housing Council. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mr. Kendall,
Yes.
Mr. Lutz,
Yes.
Mrs. Oda,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer,
Yes.
Mr. Heath.
Yes.
Motion is approved.
You may continue.
Thank you, Madam President. On February 11th, this committee met to consider recommending appointments to the Troy Reinvestment Fund, TRF. The TRF will be a community-based nonprofit fund that would support revolving loan funds and other financing tools for downtown redevelopment and other community initiatives and projects. The TRF incorporators have recommended the positions of Director of Public Service and Safety and City Auditor be standing members of the TRF Board of Directors. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the position of the Director of Public Service and Safety and City Auditor to be appointees to the Board of Directors of the nonprofit organization Troy Reinvestment Fund to enable expedient consideration by the IRS of the TRF's application for 501c3 tax-exempt status, which will allow the Troy Reinvestment Fund to begin its nonprofit activity as soon as possible. The committee supports emergency legislation. That was initially signed by Tom Kendall, Mr. Twist, and myself. Since that time, I understand that there's been some movement there, and I think Mr. Kendall has asked to comment on that.
Do you
may.
have comments?
If I may,
questions?
Madam President. In light of information that has come to my attention post the Personnel Committee meeting on February 11th, which discussed placing the Safety Service Director and City Auditor on the TRF Committee, and heard also during that meeting information regarding the potential city contributions of $500,000 to that committee, I have since learned that there is no support to encumber, appropriate, or otherwise expend $500,000 of city taxpayer money for this proposed purpose. As such, there does not seem a need at this point in time to place anyone from within the city administration on the committee. If anyone would like to independently join or become a part of the advisory nonprofit, this is their personal prerogative. With this in mind, I would like to withdraw my support for this legislation, and the council may take whatever action they deem necessary. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments at this point?
Madam President, I would only point out that I received an email from the city auditor today who didn't express yay or nay, but just had some concerns about the appointment of him on this committee. He is not here today, but I did get an email from him today.
Okay. Any other questions or comments at this point?
If I may, also. I was out of state at the time the committee met and watched it online at a later date. And I have some real serious reservations myself about the city involvement in these sort of things with the other revolving loan funds and things that are available for organizations. I fully support a nonprofit or some other organization on the outside that's willing to have private funds in this, and this would greatly enhance public and private partnerships if used in that fashion. But at this point, I could not support anything personally like that. So I just have some real reservations of city funds being put into a private nonprofit that we don't have any oversight of with this body here.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. Do you have anything further, Mr. Seeger, to this?
No, with those,
Okay.
I don't know how I officially do it. Do I adopt those
Thank
or
you.
they just
No,
go as
it
comments?
has to go through legislation
Okay.
process. Yes.
Thank you, Madam President.
The next reports are for the Recreation and Parks Committee and Chairman, Mr. Brock Heath.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. We have two items tonight. Committee members Heath and Terwilliger met on February 11th, 2019 to consider the recommendation of the Board of Park Commissioners that the event concession area of the Miami Shores Golf Course Clubhouse be named the Shoreline. This committee supports the recommendation of the Board of Park Commissioners and recommends that legislation be prepared to name the Miami Shores Golf Course Clubhouse event concession area the Shoreline. Respectively submitted by Mrs. Oda, Mr. Terwilliger, and myself as chair of this committee.
Any questions or comments from council?
If I may.
Sure.
Just in watching that meeting online also, I was very amused at the public names that came up with that. I thought that was very creative for some of the folks.
There were some good ones.
Thank you. You may continue then, Mr. Heath.
Thank you, ma'am. And our last item is a quick one as well. Committee members Heath and Terwilliger met on February 11th to consider use agreements associated with two concert events at Treasure Island Park that will include the sale and consumption of alcoholic beverages. These concerts are scheduled for June 29th and August 3rd. Events that include the sale and consumption of alcohol at this venue require specific council action, which is what we're recommending tonight. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to execute the Treasure Island non-ticketed use agreements for the two concerts on June 29th and August 3rd. This is also respectively submitted by Mrs. Oda, Mr. Terwilliger, and myself as chair of the Rec and Parks Committee.
Any questions or comments from council? Thank you, Mr. Heath.
Thank you, ma'am.
The Utilities Committee has the next reports. In the absence of Chairman Terwilliger, Mr. Twist, would you
Sure.
like to present those, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. The committee met on February 11th to consider an intergovernmental agreement between the City of Troy and the City of Dayton that would continue the process of Troy purchasing reclaimed pebble lime from the city of Dayton and Dayton removing the lime sludge residual from the city lagoons to use in their rekilning process. The new agreement will include Dayton removing additional lime sludge to help keep the lagoon levels low. The cost of this process is less than the city having a contractor clean the lagoons and then purchase the lime from a vendor. It is the recommendation of the committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to enter into the intergovernmental agreement with the City of Dayton regarding the purchase of lime. That's respectfully submitted by William Lutz, myself, William Twiss, and Chairman John Twilliger.
Any questions or comments from council? Okay.
We also,
May continue?
Yep, we have a second one. We also met on February 11th to consider authorizing bidding for the replacement of programmable logic controllers, PLC systems at the wastewater treatment plant. This project is included in the 2019 budget due to this hardware system being considered at its end of life and is no longer being supported. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise bids and enter into a contract for the replacement of the programmable logic controller systems at the wastewater treatment plant at a cost not to exceed $170,000. That is respectfully submitted by William Lutz, myself, William Twiss, and Chairman John Twilliger.
Any comments or questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Twiss. We now open the meeting to citizen comments. At this time, does anyone in the audience have any questions or comments related to the agenda items this evening? If so, please come to the microphone, state your name and address. There is a 2-minute time limit at this point in the meeting, and Mr. Grant Kerber is our timekeeper. Seeing none, then we'll move on to resolutions and ask Mrs. Knight to read Resolution R4, 2019.
Resolution number R4, 2019, resolution approving the application of Slimline Surgical Devices, DBA Canyon Run Engineering Technologies, for assistance from the Small Business Development Revolving Loan Fund and declaring an emergency. This would be a loan in the amount of $83,737.50 and has been recommended by the Loan Review Committee. First reading.
Are there any questions from council?
I'd make a motion to suspend the rules, please.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twiss?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Adopt, I'll second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Heath to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twiss?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R5, 2019.
Resolution number R5, 2019, resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the replacement of the programmable logic controllers, PLC, system at the wastewater treatment plant at a cost not to exceed $170,000. First reading.
Any questions or comments from council?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Twiss to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twiss?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Heath and seconded by Mr. Phillips to adopt the resolution. Is there any further discussion from council? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twiss?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R6, 2019.
Resolution number R6, 2019, resolution naming the concession event area at the Miami Shores Golf Course Clubhouse as the Shoreline. This has been recommended for approval by the Board of Park Commissioners. First reading.
Are there any comments or questions from council?
Move to suspend the rules on that.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Heath and seconded by Mr. Phillips to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Siebert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Heath and seconded by Mr. Twist to adopt the resolution. Is there any further discussion? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Siebert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R7, 2019.
Resolution number R7, 2019, resolution adjusting fees related to various services of the City of Troy, Ohio, and specifically to update cemetery fees. First reading.
Any questions from council?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Siebert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes. Move to adopt.
I'll second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Heath to adopt the resolution. Is there any further discussion from council? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Siebert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R8, 2019.
Resolution number R8, 2019, a resolution appointing the City of Troy, Ohio Director of Public Service and Safety and the City Auditor as the City of Troy appointees to the Board of Directors of the not-for-profit corporation Troy Reinvestment Fund and declaring an emergency. This is the first reading.
Any comments from council or questions?
Move to suspend the rules.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Lutz and seconded by Mr. Phillips to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Siebert?
Yes.
Move to adopt the resolution.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Lutz and seconded by Mr. Kendall to adopt the resolution. Is there any further questions or discussion? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Kendall?
No.
Mr. Lutz?
No.
Mrs. Oda?
No.
Mr. Phillips?
No.
Mr. Swazer?
No.
Mr. Heath?
No.
Mr. Siebert?
No.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Resolution failed adoption.
We'll move on to ordinances and ask Mrs. Knight to please read ordinance 03, 2019.
Ordinance number 03, 2019, an ordinance changing the zoning of in-lot 10622, parcel number D08 104346 in the city of Troy, Ohio, from M2 Light Industrial District to an Industrial Plan Development, PD. This is located at 44 Peters Avenue, has been recommended by the Troy Planning Commission. This is the second reading, and a committee meeting of the Community and Economic Development Committee will be scheduled prior to the next committee council meeting to make a recommendation.
This then will go to a third reading. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight, please read ordinance 04, 2019.
Ordinance number 04, 2019. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio to enter into an intergovernmental agreement regarding the purchase of lime from the City of Dayton, Ohio. The City of Troy currently has an agreement. This would be a renewal agreement. However, we did not receive final approval of the exhibit from the City of Dayton today, and so the law director had suggested this go to a second reading as pending that final approval.
Okay, any further discussion on that? Okay, this will go to a second reading then. And Mrs. Knight, then please read our final ordinance, 05-2019.
Ordinance number 05-2019, ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to execute Treasure Island non-ticketed use agreements for 2019 events at Treasure Island Park. This would be for the dates of June 29th and August 3. It would include the sale and consumption of alcoholic beverages at those two concert events, the talent of which is yet to be announced. And this has been recommended by the Recreation Board and the Board of Park Commissioners. First reading.
Are there any comments from council?
Move for suspension.
I'll second that.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Heath to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes. Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to adopt the ordinance. Is there any comments from council? Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
No.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Lutz?
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
That completes the business portion of tonight's meeting. Mrs. Knight, are there any communications or announcements?
Just the usual reminder about the filing of financial disclosure statements. That is all.
Thank you. Mayor Beamish, do you have any comments for us this evening?
I will pass tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Titterington, any comments?
Thank you, ma'am. Nothing this evening.
Thank you. Director of Law, Mr. Kerber? Any
Well, I have to
comments?
say something now, I suppose. Everybody else passed.
Mr. Clark?
Just in reference to the Lime agreement, usually we would have that all buttoned up before it comes, but you recall in the news, the City of Dayton Water Department had, I suspect this is the issue, they had some problems down there. It's my understanding most of these things would be rather routine, but, until we know for certain we're on board, we don't want to bring it before council.
Thank you. Thank you for letting us know that. That brings up a question. Does Troy have water lines that go under our river to connect one side of the town to the other? And do we monitor those regularly, or how are they checked? Is there a way?
We do. It's not like you can go and camera them since they're under pressure,
Okay.
but we do routinely check them as much as we can.
Just curious. Also, on behalf of Troy City Council, I'd like to congratulate Kurt Ochterberg on his retirement from the Troy Fire Department. I believe he was there about 25 years. So that's an accomplishment. Are there any comments from city council members this evening?
Madam President.
Wherever.
Everybody's going.
Everybody.
Go ahead.
We'll start with you,
Start
Brown.
hearing swoop around. I just wanted to say, in advance, thank you to the guys who are going to be out doing the plowing again tonight. Sounds like we're going to get hit again. They've done a great job. Not perfect, obviously. They're doing the best they can out there, but sounds like they'll be out again tonight, and we appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Phillips?
We also have some sewer lines going underneath the river. Is that also true, Mr. Secretary?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yes, okay.
Those are not under pressure, so we can televise those. And
I would hope not.
well, you would have to
Yeah,
work
we
but not in this case.
Anything else here?
I had one. Madam President, as has been publicized, on the 23rd, there's going to be a open forum for the Meet the Candidates. I found out this weekend that my daughter, who rides in as equestrian for Miami, qualified for regionals, and so she will be in Lexington, Kentucky, and so I will not be in attendance, although it's been set forth there.
And
Or
I
did I
don't
say
know,
meet the
that's not
candidates?
to meet the
I'm
candidates.
sorry.
I don't think,
I apologize. It's the open forum that actually Bill Lutz has kind of organized and put together at the library. But I saw it in the paper, and I saw that I was going to be in attendance, and I just wanted people to know I'm not going to be there for a very good reason. So,
Congrats.
yeah,
any further comments from council?
yeah, thank you.
Any comments from city staff this evening? Any questions or comments from anyone in the audience? Please come to the microphone and state your name and address.
Greetings, Council. Andrew Luring, 918 Wheeler Street, Troy, Ohio. I want to thank the Council and express my gratitude for the support the city provides to the Lincoln Community Center. I appreciate the efforts made by this Council and past councils to ensure that this community gym remains in the city of Troy. And I hope that the next mayor is as devoted as Mayor Beamish. With that in mind, I was wondering what the current allocation budget is for the Lincoln Community Center and how, if possible, we can increase that for the Lincoln Community Center.
Mr. Titterington, would you like to address that, please?
Sure. The allocation this year for Lincoln Community Center is $25,000. That is actually an increase over the past year. Every year we have a budget process that all the departments and all the allocations go through. And so if there was to be anything, that would be the time and place for Shane and the board to talk to us about increasing the allocation.
Thank you. Secondarily, I was interested in wondering how the city council interacts with the school district school board and how they communicate and how they collaborate to ensure that we have a strong educational environment in the city of Troy.
In the past, we have had a joint meeting or two. We don't do that real regularly. I believe that the mayor and the safety service director communicate with the school board or with the superintendent on a regular basis and bring anything to our attention should there be anything. But we, with economic development being one of our core efficiencies, we work pretty closely as far as trying to keep the tax base up and keep a lot of industry in town and things, which in turn helps our schools. So if there's any specific questions, well, we'd be glad to try to answer them, but they work together pretty close.
Mr. Baker?
Yeah, Mr. Kendall?
Also, I know some of us on council recently participated in the strategic planning events that Mr. Piper held with us out of Bravo room and all. So
Cool. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience have any comments or questions?
Madam President, if I could dovetail on what Mr. Titterington
Mr.
said about
Phillips?
the Lincoln Center. The $25,000 is not all inclusive of what we do for the center. Would you like to expand on the other items that we provide them?
Oh, sure.
So that, that doesn't sound like a flat fee and to fully educate Mr. Loring.
Sure, and you're absolutely correct. The budget allocation is $25,000. In addition to that, we're responsible for the outside maintenance of the facility, including the exterior of the building. We handle the mowing during the mowing season. We also handle the plowing and salting of the driveway and the parking lot. From time to time, as staff availability is there, we will help with smaller projects on the inside related to plumbing or electrical, carpentry, etc. So there's a variety of in-kind services that we will provide from time to time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Thank you all for attending tonight's meeting. Have a safe and peace-filled week. Meeting adjourned.